Hello and welcome. Here is our next book chat with Nigel Holmes and Joyful Infographics.
Hi, Nigel.
Hi, Alberto. Hi, Tamara. Good to see you.
How are you doing?
I'm fine. It's very cold here, but I guess it's pretty cold where Tamara is and incredibly hot where Alberto is.
It is not that hot. I mean, it's Miami, Florida. It's getting colder. We are in our 60s right now, so that counts as winter over here, I guess.
60s.
Congratulations on the book.
Yes,
We
congratulations.
Received, yeah, Tamara has not received her
book.
copy yet, but yeah. It looks fantastic. Fantastic. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, it's all due to you, Alberto. A large part of it is due to you. You know, I was scared when we started. I'd have an editor whose first language isn't English. But, you know, you were great. I mean, you just said, you know, do whatever you want to do, and I'll correct you a little bit, which you did. You made great suggestions. So thank you.
I appreciate that, Nigel. It was a pleasure working with you. Tamara, do you want to take the lead, or how do we do this? You decide.
Maybe you should be a bit more in the lead for this one since you worked more closely with Nigel on it. I certainly have various comments and thoughts of my own, having just read through the entire thing yesterday.
Okay, no, can do that. These conversations are conversations with our authors are very informal, so you can just do it that way. So Nigel, maybe you can begin by expanding on what you just said, talking a little bit about the genesis of the book, how the book happened. Not taking anything for granted, because obviously I know the answer to that. Right. We talked about it several times, but you know, our audience doesn't know where the book comes from.
Yeah, well, you called me and said, write a book. I mean, that was pretty much it. And you said, it's your title, Joyful Infographics. I don't know what I would have called it, but this is perfect. And it was nice to be able to do the cover and stick myself in the middle of it. I guess I was ready to do it. That's why I said yes straight away. And the more I did, the more I felt that maybe I shouldn't be doing it because it was too personal, or it wasn't academic enough. I mean, the publisher is an academic publisher, and I made it clear to him and you that I couldn't write an academic book. I didn't want to. And everybody said yes all along. So it was actually very easy. And it took a lot longer than I thought. Was supposed to be finished at the beginning of this year, 21, and it took until way past the middle of the year. But I must say, you know, I've written actually quite a lot of books now, and writing is not the right word for it. I've produced a lot of books, or the books have my name on it. And but this is the first one that I've actually kind of written in chapters that kind of lead maybe from one to another, or deal with a subject and then that subject's over and we deal with the next subject. And I had the most fun doing this. It was terrific. And you suggested, Alberto, that really I should design it as well. So thank you for that, because I was panicked at the beginning of the year when I was supposed to be delivering the book. And most of it was, I would say 80% of it was written by that time. That I had to suddenly learn InDesign myself. And I think it's a great program. I probably have managed to find out about a quarter of what it can actually do, but it did everything that I wanted it to do, and I made it do things that, you know, so that I wasn't being driven by certain ways that it wanted to set type. And I think there are some inconsistencies in it, actually, which probably a professional book designer would pick holes in. But somehow that didn't matter either, because the whole thing is, to my mind anyway, is a kind of casual conversation with the reader, more than it is first you do this, then you do this, then you do this. And I think I started the book out with something that Alberto was quite rightly said, don't mention him at the beginning, put him somewhere else in the book. And this is the professor who hates my work. And so I did that. So, I mean, that was actually a great piece of advice as well. So anyway, you know, I'm rambling on here, but
actually that's fun. One of the things I loved about, so I opened it up and we're in the warm-up sketches section, and I'm like, wow, you actually literally mean stretches. Yeah. And it got me thinking, okay, I should stretch, I should move. So it was this sort of, I expected it to be purely figurative, and then it was literal, and I loved that thing that I did not see coming. So
it's a book about joy that makes you feel the joy.
I know it had so many twists like that, where there'd be these incredibly evocative metaphors, or there's just a lot that really worked.
Yeah. Good. If you allow me, I'm going to make a quick reflection about why I asked you to do the book and why I prompted you and sort of like nudged you in that particular way, which is related to how I met you. I met you decades ago, 2 decades ago, actually, at the Malofiesh conference in Spain, Infographics conference. And the first thing that I noticed about you and about other authors that we are working with, like Jen Christensen and many others, who are also longtime designers whose careers began much earlier than mine, was your kindness and your humor. That defines you as a designer, and that needs to be reflected somehow in the book. How personable you were, how welcoming you were of newcomers, like I was at the time, and none of your previous, all of your previous books have that sort of like humor, but they are about something else, right? They are not really about you as a designer and about how you as a designer influences the work that you produce and the way that you do things. I think that is worth explaining. And the reason is that I, having taught for so many years at this point, and being a self-taught person in terms of design, data visualization, numbers and statistics and many other things, I'm self-taught on everything. I have come to realize that we human beings learn by reading textbooks or books that are, as you said, highly academic. For example, Tamara's book is perfect for learning, right? Because Tamara's book summarizes a lot of research, a lot of empirical evidence. That type of book is highly necessary in the industry, and you learn a lot from it. On the other hand, you learn by practicing, by making things yourself and receiving feedback, constant feedback about the work that you do. And then in the middle, we have a type of lesson, book, teachings, etc., that are much more personal, which is the voice of the mentor, the voice of the artisan, who teaches you how to apply both the practice that you practice every single day to your work and learn from it, but also how you apply the high-level academic knowledge to your work, how you condense it all, and then applying your own personal judgments, you make decisions every day. So that's the reason why I think that a book like this was perfect for the series, just because it's not a bad thing that it is not academic. That was the whole purpose of the book. It's still a learning tool, because we learn by copying other people, by borrowing ideas from other people, as well as we learn from reading more academic, more empirical books.
Yeah. I certainly learned from borrowing. Sorry, Tamara, go on.
Oh, I was going to mention, you even talk about that process in your book, where you talk about the tracing of the Muybridge silhouettes.
Right.
So it's just what came to mind when Alberto said that.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
you know, for hundreds and hundreds of years, artists have in part learned by taking examples from previous people, learning how to copy them so that then they could find their own voice, but that it's that practice along the way to get the technical skills under your belt, and then figure out exactly how it is that you want to say things and how you want to say them.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there's definitely room for books. This series is deliberately trying to have a broad spread from the ultra academic, admittedly sometimes a bit dense books like mine, and you know, the much more conversational books from people that have learned directly out of practice. So we like to see the full spread.
Yeah.
I would say, Tamara, that your book is not dense. Your book is very readable, but it's much more academic, has that more sort of like high level, you know, a tone, general tone, etc. It's not, so it's like we can see who you are through the book, but it is not as sort of like, here I am, here's the way that I do things, right? It's more about condensing all this knowledge, and there's incredible value in that type of book as well.
Right.
Nigel, you sort of like hinted a little bit about your process. I mean, you mentioned that you learn InDesign to create the book. Can you talk a little bit about your let's say your daily schedule, perhaps for as advice for future writers, for future authors that we may end up working with?
Do you mean about writing the book, or
how you wrote it? What types of sort of like schedule, discipline you impose yourself, etc.?
I did actually impose a discipline. You know, I'm old, Alberto, so nobody calls me to ask me to actually do work anymore. So I had more time to do this, which was nice. And so I would write every day something by hand on paper, and this has been a guiding principle, you know, hated by students mostly, who just want to run straight to a computer and see what it can do for you, rather than making it do what it should do, which was what I was alluding to about InDesign, because there are templates in InDesign. I could just have shoved it all into that and said, okay, run the text around this picture and I want it this big and whatever. So yes, every day write. And when I thought I'd got enough, then I would, to begin with, I would make a Word document of it, because I wasn't using InDesign to begin with. And so, and it was when the time almost came to send this to Elliot to read, when I realized that I was going to have to send a Word document and a load of pictures separate from this, with a note in the Word document about how big this picture was going to be and where it was and exactly what it was. And it was hopeless. I mean, you were so right. I should have taken your advice a lot earlier and done it. But I thought that for this book, it might be interesting just to write it and get somebody else to design it. I thought that might actually be kind of interesting. But it turned out not to be that kind of a book at all. It wasn't, here's an illustration, here's the text, here's another illustration, here's the text about it. And so when I got into InDesign, I found that I could do a lot more than I thought I was going to be able to do, which is why I liked it so much. So, you know, I had decided what sort of importance certain pictures needed, but not exactly the size. And, you know, was I going to kind of put one little picture in the middle of a lot of white space, or was going to run type around it? And I treated it much more like a magazine, I think, where there's a kind of a pacing of certain big spreads and certain things where there's a lot going on the page, and some pages, actually the one or two pages, which are just text, and there's nothing the matter with that. But anyway, back, I would still be writing by by hand, but then putting it directly into InDesign, typing it into InDesign on the page. And I love the fact that I could, you know, click that little thing and it would flow around to the next page. Wow, we've got a magic. I just, I mean, I think this is why I had so much fun doing it. And I could see the possibilities. And that was partly why it took longer, because Elliot was very good. He said, take as long as you want. Well, not as long as you want, but he said, take more time. And so I actually changed quite a lot of it as I was going along, and changed whole sections, and found that, you know, it was possible to just move whole bits of it to another place because it read better there. And then, of course, I had to go through it and do what Alberto's rules, which was you can't have anything that's too long without a paragraph in it. So we had to have extra paragraphs. And for some reason, I don't know why, but instead of paragraphs, I put a space in between each paragraph, which was, when I think about it now, it's slightly unconventional, but it seemed better for this book, that it was like that instead of indenting, you know, 5 or 6 M's or whatever it was for each beginning of each paragraph, that you actually put a white line in there. And I thought, I let that, I started doing that, and then I thought, no, that's what I'll do throughout. Yep.
I recommended InDesign because as you know, I write my own books directly in InDesign.
Yes.
I just open InDesign, I start doing the layout, and in my case, for instance, my publishers don't use the document that I create directly, so they don't take the InDesign document and then publish it after minor changes. They recreate, but at least they recreate the document. But at least it gives them an idea of what I would like the book to look like. And also, it's a great way for an author to see what the book is going to look like. And, you know, this is a book written by people who are very visual. We need to see what it is that it's going to look like at the end. It's a way to keep also yourself excited about it, because what you see on screen looks beautiful. It's not just a blank Word document. It's actually a visual object. It's sort of like a 200-page infographic, if you think about it, right? And I think that's the reason why this approach works so well for people like us. I was taking a look at actually the spaces in between paragraphs, which is also something that I do myself. That extra negative spacing there really adds something to the book. What would you like people to get from the book? Right. So what messages do you want people to get from what you wrote?
Oh, I think I want young people to want to make information graphics. They can and be happy about it and enjoy it. I think that's the main thing. I mean, they've got to look at Tamara's book, or not any number, but other books about how to actually do it. There's no teaching in here. There's no, this is how you actually make a chart. And you may want to edit this bit out. I have absolutely no idea how to use any of the chart making things like Tableau, or I don't use them. And so everything I do by hand. So I am horrified if somebody comes to me with a huge data set, and I will say to them very seriously, you know, well, what's the most important bit to show here? Because I can't plot all this out by hand. And probably, you know, the next thing I should do is learn that and see what that does. But back to your question, I just want people to look at it and say, oh, this is a fun field to be in, and here's one person doing his version of it. And now, you know, maybe I couldn't go quite as far as this, but I can see that there are ways of doing things that are not straightforward. I never want to say that the numbers by themselves are kind of boring, because I can't do that. That's really because numbers aren't boring, they're exciting, but they have a meaning behind them. And that's what I always try to show for the reader, because my readers have always been non-academic people, non-specialists, people who read magazines for fun and need some help in telling them what the graph is about before they actually get into it and read the information. Now, if I don't deliver the information pretty quickly, then it's failed. And at the back here, I have shown some things where the illustration completely got away with me. And there are a couple of dreadful things in the back here, which I put a big red cross through.
You did. That's a fun
like
section.
That. Yes.
Yeah, because you can get carried away and oh, that's awful, that is so awful.
But you crisscrossed it yourself, which is funny.
Somebody at times should have said, don't do this. And the trouble is, they promoted me to graphics director, so I was saying, oh, I can do that. I didn't filter it down enough myself. So I think it's okay to admit mistakes, by the way, and just say, I wouldn't do this again.
Yeah, I think that one of the so I have many thoughts about what you just said, and one of them is that I tend to believe more every day that visualization is not just a single thing. Visualization is like writing. It can be used for many different purposes, for many different types of audiences. Some visualizations are necessarily deep and complex and dense because they are intended to let specialists detect patterns in data, right? So they are necessarily complex and difficult to read, and because just the information that they contain is rich. But some visualizations are intended to just quickly communicate a point, quickly make a point. And there's no contradiction in terms. It's just two different types of usage of the same language. What defines visualization is not the purpose, it's the language itself, the process of getting some numbers, some data, not necessarily numbers, but data in general, encoding those numbers in graphic forms, and then that is the language. That is what visualization is. And then the purpose is what determines whether a visualization is more fun, more illustrated, or more dense, more complex. There's no contradiction in terms. They are compatible. Compatible with each other.
Right. I mean, I think, I blithely say, know your audience. And sometimes it's actually very difficult to know the audience that's looking, or somebody could pick it up who wasn't really your audience. And that can lead to some problems. But I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I am talking to people who probably don't know anything about the subject that I'm dealing with. And as I've said many times, if I can make them smile, then I'm halfway to them staying with it and getting into whatever details I have actually put into the piece.
Yeah, it's that you're making something for a non-captive audience, right?
Yes,
they could walk away at any moment, and part of your job is to keep them there long enough to see the complete thing. And I think that's a very different thing than a system designed for someone who's working for hours every day for weeks or months. That is such a very different world.
Yeah.
So I like Alberto's point about this huge tent. It's indeed something enormous.
Yes.
Yeah. You will never design a business dashboard, for example, with these types of illustrations, right? That doesn't make sense, because the whole point of a business dashboard is to get you the main insights from the data quickly and effectively. But when you are designing just a single graphic that is going to be published on a newspaper page or on a magazine page, make a point relatively quickly, and as you said, make people smile briefly so they get more interested in what it is that they are looking at. That's just a completely different way of using the same language. One thing that you said, go ahead, Tamara. Sorry about that. I don't want to monopolize the conversation.
No, I think that another thing Nigel said is really important, which is that he's typically working with very, very small data sets, and those have absolutely their own challenges. And you know, if you stuck a bunch of them into Tableau, you would get a bunch of identical looking, you know, 6-bar charts.
Yeah.
And that would not serve your purpose. And so, you know, I think there's this world of, you know, boutique, artisanal, handmade for small data sets. And of course, you're doing something completely different than if you had 1 million data points. And I mean, I think it would be extremely intriguing to see if you did learn those tools to handle big data, what you would browbeat them into doing, because you're used to having complete expressivity. And, you know, in the academic biz world, there's this whole, you know, efficiency versus expressivity is a huge debate. And so tools force you to do certain things because certain things are easy versus hard versus even flat out impossible. And I feel like your style is exactly the opposite of cookie cutter tools. But sometimes if you hand somebody a cookie cutter and then they start using it to pound a nail, right, they can do all kinds of interesting things. So I could imagine you finagling them into doing something quite intriguing that they were not designed to do.
I don't imagine Nigel coding in R, but I can try one day.
One never knows.
You never know. You never know.
The future is a big place.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just ask chat, what is it, GPT?
Yes.
To do it for me, you know, and see what they would do. Has anybody tried that, by the way?
Yeah.
Yes.
The artificial intelligence tool that you ask questions to and then it generates an answer.
Yes.
Yeah, I tried it. Yeah.
But I mean, have you given it a data set and
oh
said,
no, I have not done that.
No.
Have you, Tamara?
I have not, although some people have done interesting things. Joe Wood had a great essay in AltViz this year about the walled garden, where he talked about using not ChatGPT, but the opposite, the WALL-E, these these models that allow you to give text prompts and then generate images, and talked about what some of the expressiveness entails in trying to create moods about what is the sort of affect.
I was about to say about your creating things manually by hand that we were just discussing. There's a new generation of visualization designers nowadays who use that approach. You know, we talk about, I don't know, Giorgia Lupi, who you mentioned in the book, Federica Fragapane, for example, etc. They create very intricate artistic data visualizations, but they barely use they don't use code, and they don't use very complex software tools. They do it manually. So it's like in Adobe Illustrator and other tools. So they spend hours and hours moving points and lines and curves around, and they get Federica and some other designers that I have talked to for my upcoming book have told me that they sort of like enter some sort of like a meditative state of flow by moving things around. And that actually spoke to me, because when I design an infographic, I can get so absorbed in it that I completely forget about everything that surrounds me. I'm completely focused on the work. I'm reading into the literature about artisans and craftsmanship, etc. Apparently that is very common. Everybody who engages in sort of like manual activities that require your full attention, they prompt you to enter these types of states.
Yes. Yeah. I think I do to a certain extent as like that. I lose myself in the creation of the thing to get it to. I think what I'm trying to do, what everybody is trying to do, is somehow make whatever tools you've got, whether it's a pencil, or this isn't a pencil, but a pencil, or a computer program, you've got to make it do what you want it to do. This is vital. And my way of doing it is first to write, if I'm writing by hand, and if I'm making a visual graphic, to draw it, physically draw it. And then if I like that drawing, I'll probably do another one on top of it, and then another one and another one on a series of tracing paper until I get it right. And then I'll scan that and bring that into a drawing program. And and kind of tighten it up a little bit, but not much, because the drawing knows that it's going to be tightened up. So I draw in a slightly tightened up way to begin with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And there's a little bit about that in the book, where you reproduce sketches that you have used for some of your graphics. I think that seeing the process is quite informative to read. Yeah. I was educated as a newspaper graphics designer by the people from your generation, right? People who didn't use computers at all. They used transparencies and tracing paper, and you know, layout. Even the copy was sort of like printed out and then cut in little pieces and placed on the graphic, and then everything was sort of like scanned. And
it made you think. It was slow. It made you think you couldn't do as much. I think I did, the most I did was probably 4 in 1 week at time. But so I'm now on the computer, when I'm making graphics, I do it very slowly. I'm really thinking about it. I'm using 2 screens, and I'm deliberately kind of slowing it down, so that well, it's the computer equivalent of doing it by hand.
It's a way to take control of the tool.
I mean, I have to deliver it in a digital form, so there's no point in me trying to just say, oh, what I do is I draw things and I send it to you, you know, we courier it to wherever it's going to. Of course not, can't do that. But you know, it's interesting, when I looked back at those things for Philip, some of the drawings are not bad. I mean, they're so kind of precise and everything because of that this wonderful German thing that I've got here.
Well, I'm getting myself some of those, whatever they are called, because I'm doing more sketching these days and drawing these days, and they are really useful. Very useful.
I thought I'd heard them called French curves, but ironically,
French curves.
So
I mean, this one is German. French curves are usually in a box, but then they're numbered, and so you get this kind of, and they're also called ship's curves, some of them. And we had a box of them at time, and one of them was almost straight, was wonderful for horizons, you know, it was just slightly, and then they went down until, you know, in the bottom of the box they were circular.
Well, Nigel, congratulations again for the book. The book looks wonderful. It's great read, and I'm very happy personally that came to see the light of the day. I think that people will enjoy it a lot. They will learn a lot from it. Thank you again for writing it. Tamara,
thank you for asking.
I think a few things that jumped out at me. We've been talking a lot about, unsurprisingly, visuals, but there were some word things that stuck, and this idea of clarifying instead of simplifying, I thought was an important message. But there's one which had never crossed my mind, where you suggested, don't call them audiences, call them guests. And this metaphor of guests at a dinner party, it was in the context of, you know, if you're hosting a dinner, you could be sensitive to food allergies, and that's like a designer handling color deficiency. But this idea that your graphics are for your guests, I think will stick with me.
Oh, thank you.
Pleasure. Okay, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Good to see you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.